Okay. Well, we are on a bit of an abbreviated schedule today. We're wrapping stuff up a little bit early. I have a PowerPoint. I don't know if you saw it, but if not, it's fine. It's okay. We are going to be eating and all that kind of stuff after, so hang out and we'll get that going. I do need a couple of you guys, if you're willing to move some tables real quick. There's not many that need moved, but go see Kathy, and either right after or if you want to go right now, that's fine too. But just need a couple tables moved, and we'll get all this going. Steve said just before that Debbie is going to be having her surgery here pretty soon. She's at Vandy. Is that what you? I don't know where he went. She's at Vanderbilt right now, and that will be coming up very soon. So keep her in your prayers and that family too. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and flip over Matthew chapter 14. Matthew 14. So we've been looking all week at examples of bravery, specifically from Peter in John. Peter's kind of been the reoccurring theme through the week. But Peter is certainly very brave. We saw the first night, I believe, we saw Peter standing up at Pentecost and being willing to profess his faith to thousands of people, many of whom had just killed Jesus. And so that takes a lot of courage. And we saw Monday night, we talked about Peter and John as they're arrested and they are facing, legal issues, and their lives are potentially on the line, and yet they continue to do what's right. And last night, we talked about Paul and Paul's shipwreck and all the sufferings that Paul did. Tonight we're looking, it's a little bit of a different take. It's not so much a clear-cut example of bravery, although there is bravery, it's also an example of failure. So let's just go ahead and read Matthew chapter 14, and let's pick up verse 22. So this is just after Jesus feeds the 5,000. Verse 22, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. And they said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it's I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But he saw the wind and was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they had gotten into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And so you have really this interesting Peter being classic Peter here. Peter is a man of action. Okay, that's fine. We don't need. It's only 3 little slides. It's fine. Peter is a man of action, and Peter, in classic Peter form, takes quick action. It seems like almost every time you talk about Peter and whatever situations he finds himself in, he is always the first one to jump into saying something or doing something, and he doesn't seem that he always thinks his thoughts out before he does them, right? When Jesus is there at the Last Supper and he says, "One of you guys is going to betray me," what's his response? Well, maybe those guys, but I'm not. And, what do we know happens? Well, he denies him. And so this is, I think, another one of those stories of Peter jumping into action. And in this instance, sometimes it goes well for Peter, but in this instance, it doesn't go too well. And he walks on water but then he sinks. I think that's a very interesting story, because Peter is very clearly a brave man. He's very clearly somebody who takes action seriously and somebody who jumps in and dives in and gets to work. And sometimes it pays off in big ways, right? Think about when Jesus in Matthew chapter 19 has his disciples gathered, and he talks about the church, and Peter's response to the situation he's in is, my Lord and my God, you are the Son of God. And he's correct. He dives in and he speaks, and he is often the kind of the spokesperson for the apostles. There's times of great success like that, and then there's times of failure. What are some of the extremes of Peter in the Bible that you see? What are some of the moments where Peter is on the top of his game, and what are some of the moments where Peter is down about as low as you can get? What comes to mind when you think about Peter's extremes? Yeah, he cuts off Malchus's ear, right? When Jesus is being arrested, he pulls out a sword and cuts off the guy's ear, and Jesus rebukes him. What was over here? Yeah, and then you have that moment where he says, I'll die. I don't know about these guys, but I'll die. And then just immediately after, he denies Jesus 3 times. What else?
I think it was when he was crucified upside down, it was where he didn't know when he was going to die.
Yeah. Tradition says that Peter was crucified. This would be after the Bible, but that he was crucified, and some sources say that he was crucified upside down. That's definitely a demonstration of his faith. I think about Peter is the champion to the Gentiles, right? That's what he says in Acts chapter 15. He says, I'm an apostle to the Gentiles. And yet, what do you have in Galatians? What happens in Galatians? Paul rebukes him to his face because Peter's showing partiality against the Gentiles and preference for the Jews. And so, think about the denial. There's so many occasions where Peter is at one end of the spectrum. He's either the highest high or he's the lowest low. And this is an instance where you kind of get a little bit of both. For all the faults Peter has, and Peter has faults, he's somebody that is willing to take action. And I think that's really remarkable. In this instance, Peter's the one who has the faith to step out on the water. And I think that's worth noticing. Of the other disciples, okay, we're just not working PowerPoint tonight. So, I don't know. But of all the other disciples, he sees Jesus. Jesus says, don't be afraid, it's me. And it's Peter who has the courage to actually step out and go to him. Why does he fail? What is the failure here? Why does he? Well, let's ask this first. Why does he take the step out? Why does he go and step out of the boat? Faith.
But it was also lack of faith. The reason he fell was lack of faith.
Yeah.
It was more of a fear.
Yeah. He allowed fear to take over. Why else, aside from just faith, and that's a good answer, but why else might he be trying to step out on the water? He trusts Jesus. I think this is a desire to imitate Jesus in a certain degree. Jesus is doing something that nobody does. Nobody walks on water. That's Mythbusters tried it and they failed. And if Mythbusters can't do it, I don't know who could. But nobody does this. And Peter wants to be like his master. And he sees Jesus walking on water and he says, I want to do the things that you're doing. And if you're doing this, I want to be there with you. And he has the faith. But he is also easily distracted. And this is a storm. It is bad weather. And he steps out and he sees the wind and he sees the waves and he sees the power of the elements. And he takes his eyes away from Jesus, and then he begins to sink. And so, the ultimate failure of Peter here is a failure of maintaining his focus where it needs to be. And I think that's significant. Any thoughts about any of that?
I think it was kind of foolish to be stepping out like that, because what if that really wasn't Jesus? They'd be going straight down on the ground.
Yeah. Well, fortunately it was Jesus. Yeah. I think so often when we talk about this story, we think about it as a failure story. And that's kind of how we're talking about it today, right? Peter failed to walk on water. He had little faith. He trusted, but then he didn't. His trust was distracted, and he began to sink. Let's not forget the fact that Peter does walk on water, right? He does walk on water towards Jesus, and he does sink, but I don't think that detracts fully from the fact that he is the one who had the faith to walk on water with Jesus. And I think that's interesting. Have you ever considered that or thought about it? Do what? Yeah, he's the only one who got out of the boat. The other guys had the same opportunity that he had, but they didn't take it. And so Peter stands alone in that. Yeah. Do you think let's shift away from the story itself, but metaphorically, this walking on water is the thing that not everyone is comfortable doing. There's a lot of people that profess their faith, and yet they don't try and imitate. That's what sets Peter apart from the other apostles. He's trying to imitate and do the thing that Jesus is doing, so he steps out. And, I think there's a lot of Christians who may even take those steps out, but even then, they're caught in some storm. What are the things that detract from us living out the potential that or the fullness of the course that we set ourselves out on? I think there's a lot of people that start strong, like Peter, and yet for some reason or another, they end up sinking. And I think that's a big problem in the church. What are some of those factors that cause us to sink?
Not seeing the results of your efforts.
Yeah.
In the direction you expected to go.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just discouragement, right? You work towards something and you work towards it, and time goes by and you see little results, and so you throw in the towel. What else? What distract Christians from what they should be focused on? More specific. Like what? Yeah. I think there's a lot. That's a good answer. There's a lot to that answer. There's a lot of things that vie for your attention, right? Work is not a bad thing. We need to be people that work to provide for our families. Paul says if you don't provide for your family, you're worse than an unbeliever. And so we have the responsibility to work, but for many people, their work is their entire life. And they sacrifice what little that they have focused towards the spiritual on behalf of work. And I think that's a situation a lot of people find themselves in. I think people do that same thing about sports or hobbies or whatever. I think a lot of people do that with politics. And they try and find, some source of stability or salvation in politics, and they miss the big picture. And I think that's a big problem. Any other thoughts?
I think fear is a big factor in that, obviously.
Yeah.
Afraid, but that's such a normal human reaction to have, and that can distract us from our true goal, true mission in our life, because that's such a vital feeling that we can experience, but it can really distract us from Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things that we're just afraid of. And most of those are unrealized. And we talked about that a little bit on Sunday, right? Just unrealized anxieties about, worried about tomorrow. And, Matthew 6 talks about, why are you worried about tomorrow? Tomorrow's going to take care of itself. You need to think about today. Trust that God's going to provide for you for what you need. I think often fear is hard to pinpoint. Why is it that not a lot of Christians are willing to take the steps, to step out of the boat? It's a comfortable thing to be inside the boat, right? It is an uncomfortable thing to do what Peter does. Peter is stepping out onto the water, and you can imagine, he trusted and he was allowed to do it, but that first step out of the boat would have been a very uncomfortable experience, I can imagine. Why are Christians so content with staying comfortable, and is that a detriment? Yeah. Peter's inherently a risk taker, right? He took a risk, and risks are uncomfortable. And I think that there's a challenging issue in the church, broadly speaking, of too many Christians are too comfortable. And I think that's just broadly true. It is not comfortable to do the things that Christ calls you to do. It's just not. It's not comfortable to be evangelistic. Your comfort level with doing those things may increase as you do it, but it's not comfortable. And think about, we talked about Paul last night. Think about what Paul endured. Do you think Paul was comfortable in his Christianity? Do you think that his faith led him to live a comfortable life? No. He's beaten, he's kicked out of town, he was, stoned and shipwrecked and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that as a Christian you have to suffer the way that Paul suffered. That's not what I'm saying. But what Paul was willing to do was to be uncomfortable for Christ. And I think there's a lot of Christians, and especially American Christians, that are not comfortable with becoming discomfortable. We are totally adverse to any sort of discomfort because we live such comfortable lives, right? We have more money than we know what to do with, many of us. We have more food than we know what to do with. We have more of the stuff and the things than anybody in any time throughout all of history has ever had. And we like it. And so we're not willing to risk those things. Think about in mission work. There is an inherent discomfort that goes with it. In Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 12, Paul says, I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head. Paul says that he gave various positions, apostles and elders and all those sorts of things, so that they might equip the saints for the work of ministry. Paul is very clear that the work of ministry does not belong to any particular class or caste or group of people. It belongs to all Christians. And as Christians, we all bear the responsibility to be ministers and to do the things that are uncomfortable. And so when I think about the mindsets of churches, and there's been a lot of studies that have gone and delved into this kind of thing. When you think about the types of mindsets churches have, there's kind of a spectrum I've seen presented of, on one end you have mission-minded churches that are willing to get uncomfortable and be evangelistic and reach the lost and fulfill the Great Commission. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you have maintenance-oriented churches. Churches that are content with where they are, and they try and keep the gains that they had established in the past. But there's not a great push towards discomfort. Which of those churches thrives? Well, you need some of both. but you definitely need to be more oriented towards mission than you are towards maintenance. Because if you're just trying to purely maintain the gains that you have earned in the past, then it's just a sinking ship. It may be sinking slowly, but it's a sinking ship. If you're a mission-minded church, you're bringing new people in. You need some people that help maintain and keep those people built up, but you need a church that's the majority of the people are working towards growing the church. And that's what you see with Ephesians chapter 4. There's a select few elders and whatnot that are tasked with preparing the whole body, that are preparing with the saints. But all saints, elders and whoever else included, they're all responsible for the mission, for the ministry. And so, all that to say, Peter takes risks. And I think often as a church, there's too many churches that are risk adverse to their own detriment. They're not willing to become uncomfortable in the pursuit of being like Christ. Any thoughts about that? Does that make sense, or was that a bunch of gobbledygook? Felt a little gobbledygook. Okay, well, look at verse 30. We're running out of time. In verse 30, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, "Oh, you have little faith, why did you doubt?" And so, I think this is interesting too, because Peter not only has the courage to take some risks, but Peter has the courage to repent. And Peter has the courage and the wisdom to admit when he's wrong. Anytime risks are taken, there will be times where you make mistakes, and that's just inevitable. You think about the missionaries who go across seas into different cultures, and a big part of what they do in preparation for being missionaries is they spend a lot of time learning the culture and the things that will let them minister well to their people that they're trying to reach. In certain cultures, there's certain things you do and there's certain things you don't do. And they may be different from one culture to another. And so when we went to Honduras in high school, they said, if somebody offers you food, you eat it, don't ask questions, you just eat it. That food is something that was scarce. These people are living in really impoverished conditions, and they're offering you food, so you take it. It's respectful. I have a friend who's a missionary in Italy and has worked in various places in Europe. And he said it took him a while to get used to like the kissing greeting that Europeans sometimes do, where they kiss both cheeks. And he really offended an old Italian grandmother once because he didn't want to do that when he first got there. And sometimes the particular words you use are fine in one culture but different in another culture. And so, anytime you set out to do something, there's something risky. Being a missionary, there's inherent risk. There's going to be times where you make mistakes. And Peter learns this. He steps out on the water, but he makes a mistake. He looks at the things around him, he gets distracted, and he sinks. And really, that's the story of Peter all throughout the Bible, right? Peter is the one who, these other guys will betray you, but I'll die before I betray you. And then he betrays Jesus. He's very bold, and that boldness is a good thing, but he makes a mistake. In John chapter 21, you have, in Galatians chapter 2, you have again that Peter eating with the Jews, or the Gentiles. The Jews come in, he abandons the Jews or the Gentiles to go eat with the Jews. I'll get it right one of these times. He's eating with the Gentiles, leaves them when the Jews come in, and then eats with the Jews. And then Paul rebukes him. But then in Acts chapter 15, you have the Jerusalem Council, and they're talking about, what is the position with Jews in the law or Gentiles in the law, and what's the deal here? And Peter says, listen, I'm an apostle to the Gentiles. My place is to serve them. He learns from his mistake. And I think what's really interesting is that with every time that Peter makes a mistake, he sets out, he is well-meaning, makes mistakes. I think it's interesting how Jesus is always there to take him back, right? Because here, he steps out, he walks on water, and then he sinks, and he says, "Save me." And Jesus immediately sets out his hand and picks him back up. Think about when Peter betrays. What happens? In John 21, you have Peter betrays Jesus 3 times around a charcoal fire, is what John says. And then in John 21, Jesus is cooking breakfast around a charcoal fire, and he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" 3 times. And Peter says, "You know I do." And then Jesus gives him a charge. He says, "Well, then feed my sheep. Follow after me. I'm not done with you. I still have a place for you." And, in Galatians 2, we don't have an exact instance, but, God's forgiveness is always there. And Peter repented of his sin. And so, for a successful church, okay, we're out of time. Are we done, Kathy? Yeah. Okay. You need a church that is good at repentance, a church that's good at forgiving each other. James 5 says, confess your sins to one another. It's the idea of speaking it out. Let it be known. Peter is brave. I think that's pretty clear. And there's a lot to learn from Peter's example. Sometimes he takes it too far and makes mistakes, but he's always better for those mistakes that he makes. And Christ is always there to pick him back up. So be brave even when you fail. Christ is there to pick you back up. All right. Thank you, guys. If some of you guys want to go back and move some chairs and tables, that'd be great. I think Kathy will tell you what to do.